Every day we pick sides, whether we're conscious of it or not. Team red or blue, friend or foe, us or them. But why does a game or imaginary map boundary ignite such fierce loyalty and hostility? Some people think it's because of our modern world. There are too many people, too much social media, and too much monetary incentive for war. But this is certainly not the case. Yes, all these factors do contribute to tribalism. However, the instinct is much more ancient. It's wired deep in the brains we've evolved. And cultures have woven these instincts into symbols for millennia. We probably couldn't turn it off. But understanding the roots of our tribal psychology could let us steer it toward outcomes that are just a little bit better for everyone. So let's dive into our modern psychology, the archaeological record, and the leading evolutionary theories that tie it all together. While we might represent the most extreme example, humans aren't the only modern primates drawn to tribalism. Let's take a look at our closest living relative, the chimpanzee. They are a social species just like us. Chimpanzee communities follow a fission-fusion structure. This means that they split and merge into subgroups based on activities and resource availability. At their core sits an alpha male, backed by coalitions of loyal allies. Females form parallel hierarchies, bonding through grooming ties that calm tensions and reinforce alliances. Cooperative hunting and food sharing knit the group together. Researchers recently observed chimps applying insects to each other's wounds. This is further proof that chimps within the same group care for one another. When conflict does arise within a group, it's often settled through displays, fights, or reconciliatory grooming. However, there's a darker side to chimpanzee society. It's brutal, and it can feel like looking into a mirror at our own past. Chimp groups patrol their border like silent gatekeepers. These patrols are composed mostly of males. They skirt the edges of their territory until they detect a lone foe. Only when the odds are overwhelmingly in their favor do they strike. First, they have to outnumber the other group. And if they do, they leave their victims broken or dead. These lethal raids aren't frenzied brawls but cold, strategic maneuvers. Some individuals scout ahead and probe, others conduct the main ambush. The attackers usually outnumber the defenders so much that they barely get injured. And afterward, the victors expand into the emptied zone. They take advantage of the new real estate and mating opportunities. No chimp is forced into joining the raid. Each male joins or sits out based on a private cost-benefit calculation. Like a businessman assessing financial risk, natural selections wired chimps to seize only safe opportunities for collective killing. For years, it was believed that these patrol raids were confined to localized groups. Initially, Jane Goodall's groundbreaking studies focused on intra-group violence among chimps in the Gombe National Park of Tanzania. However, recent studies suggest these behaviors are less localized than we thought. For example, in 2008, researchers documented the first cases of intergroup conflict among chimps in the Tai National Park, on the opposite side of Africa. Most of these communities live in densely forested environments. This led many primatologists to believe that in less competitive open habitats, chimps would express less violence, until 2020, when evidence to the contrary was published. Chimps living in more open savannas within the Isa Valley did something chilling. Researchers found a victim of intergroup infanticide. An infant was brutally murdered and castrated by a rival group. And as we'll see shortly, ancient humans were conducting very similar acts. So as it turns out, chimp violence is more widespread than we knew, and also more complex. This implies that its roots are not confined to different ecologies, but rather to shared biology. Biology that we humans also share. If chimps patrol their borders, and so do we, how far back do these instincts go? It's very difficult to study the behavior of ancient human species. We do have some hints though. For example, we can look at the difference in size between the sexes, commonly referred to as sexual dimorphism. Generally speaking, primate species with much larger males than females express more competition between males for mates. Gorillas are a modern example of this. It's an idea that leads many to believe the same was true for ancient hominins with similar size differences like Australopithecus afarensis. In terms of group behavior, we really don't see great indicators until Homo erectus. Many anthropologists consider Homo erectus to be the first truly human species. This is largely because of the tribal behaviors that started to emerge within the species around 2 million years ago. A fascinating glimpse into one of their tribes comes from Kenya. Here, archaeologists discovered 1.5 million-year-old footprints made by a group of Homo erectus. The group consisted of at least 20 individuals, including multiple males and females. Based on their alignment, these footprints appear to have been moving in unison. walking as a cohesive tribe. We do know that Homo erectus was most likely a group hunter. Looking at their anatomy, they were adapted to hunting over long distances, also known as persistence hunting. Looking at the type of prey they consumed, we see evidence of large megafauna, even including elephants. A single Homo erectus would have been at a huge disadvantage running down an elephant, but of course it would be much more achievable with a group of buddies all running the beast down to exhaustion. While the tracks could simply represent a tribe foraging for food, the researchers sparked an interesting idea. Just imagine this group of Homo erectus patrolling a lakeshore. This is their territory. They know that animals gather here. They know that their life depends on exploiting those animals. Foreign groups could easily be seen as a threat to their livelihood. It would have been evolutionarily advantageous for them to defend and secure this resource. Could there be evidence of a full-blown Homo erectus raid somewhere along that lake? It's possible, but they'll have to keep digging to find out. It seems almost certain that ancient humans would have fought over land, territory, and just straight-up resources as well. Even some of the earliest humans were likely fighting conflicts with other tribes. But now, let's fast forward 500,000 years, where we have evidence of another human ancestor fighting their own. The species is called Homo antecessor. They're not as well known as a species like Homo erectus, but they play a key role in our story here. Homo antecessor lived in Europe around 800,000 to 1.2 million years ago. They combined a mix of archaic traits with surprisingly modern-looking faces, making them a possible common ancestor of both Neanderthals and modern humans. Some of the best-known fossils from this species were found at the Atapuerca Hills of Spain. Within the hills are massive cave systems and a specific site called Grandolina. When excavating, archaeologists unearthed an uncanny example of conflict among Homo antecessor. A large assemblage of human bones was found alongside stone tools and animal bones. Dating to around 900,000 years ago, it is undoubtedly one of the oldest archaeological sites in all of Europe. What makes Grandolina so haunting is what was found in a specific soil layer. 40% of the Homo antecessor bones in this layer bear cut marks, percussion scars, and breakage patterns that match butchery. These same marks are produced when skinning, dismembering, and extracting marrow from animals. Deer remains from the cave show that ancient humans were processing other humans just like they were prey. To put it bluntly, they were cannibalized. And it wasn't a one-stop butchery shop. According to researchers, such cannibalism apparently formed a part of the hominin subsistence and cultural systems, as the events took place repeatedly over a long period of dozens or possibly hundreds of years. The age profile of the victims deepens the mystery. The cannibalized sample is dominated by infants and other immature individuals. This is an unusual pattern for human cannibalism, but strikingly similar to when chimp groups raid their neighbors, attacking the least risky targets. Remember the infant chimp who was castrated by the rival group? Intergroup violence is most preferred when your group's chances of winning are the highest. These innocent children were easy targets for a group of full-grown Homo antecessor. But why would they do such a thing to such innocent victims? Could it be an act of desperation? A case of famine and severe hunger? Maybe. But studies looking at this age distribution found it aligns more closely with proactive group aggression in chimps than with famine-driven or ritual cannibalism in later human cases. Putting the pieces together, the authors argue that this is evidence of repeated functional cannibalism. Not a single desperate meal, but a reoccurring behavior. These were low-risk attacks during times of optimal power imbalances. The perpetrators targeted vulnerable members of neighboring groups to weaken them and then consume them for nutritional gain. Constant warring and incessant violence seem to have plagued Homo antecessor. Grandolina conjures a grim image of the hominin lineage. It forces us to consider how outright predation on rival people may be among the oldest chapters in European history. You might think acts like these can be easily excused, given how ancient these humans were. Sure, they were brutish, but that's expected for such an archaic species. However, hundreds of thousands of years later, more recent hominins living in the same area were partaking in equally disturbing activities. Let's take a look at the site of Cima de los Huesos, a cave just south of Grandolina. It preserves one of the largest Middle Pleistocene hominin assemblages ever found. Around 6,800 bone fragments, representing 28 individuals, were deposited here about 430,000 years ago. No wonder the site's name translates to the pit of bones. These individuals were clearly not modern humans, anatomically speaking. Experts have been debating which hominin species they belong to since their discovery. Some say Neanderthals, others have suggested they belong to an earlier species known as Homo heidelbergensis. Defining a species is never straightforward, and the remains here are no exception. Based on certain physical characteristics, they actually appear to have been transitional between Homo heidelbergensis and Neanderthals. But it goes to show how we can't force hominins into neat boxes. We are all part of the same braided stream. Just as fascinating as who these people were is how they died. The site's strange accumulation of bones has fueled a few different hypotheses. Was it the product of carnivores, geological transport, or intentional human action? The forensic reading of one of the skulls pushes that debate into ominous territory. Cranium-17 preserves two striking features: nearly identical fractures on the left frontal bone. These aren't random breaks. This is clearly blunt force trauma, inflicted while the bone was still fresh. The two lesions match in size and shape, and they bear the same distinctive notch. In other words, this individual was struck with the same object in separate blows. Their different orientations and trajectories further indicate that they received at least two independent impacts, likely delivered in a face-to-face altercation. This was not a fight you'd want to break up. Either blow could have been fatal. Together, they imply an intent to kill. Researchers have ruled out non-violent causes. Post-mortem sediment pressure and accidental falls would produce different fracture patterns. Geological transport or repeated impact by a falling rock would almost never produce two identical localized blows, nor is there evidence of carnivore damage or ritualized cut marks that might suggest post-mortem manipulation. The pattern fits interpersonal aggression. However, Cranium-17 wasn't alone. Further forensic and taphonomic studies found traits of fresh bone trauma in several other crania. These range from oblique fracture angles to stellate lesions. While Cranium-17 is the standout, Cranium-5, Cranium-11, and several others display compatible lesions. For some, the pattern fits intentional blows. For others, an accidental fall into the cave shaft cannot be totally ruled out. But the fact that there are multiple victims suggests collective action rather than freak accidents or lone homicide. It paints a scenario where one group encountered and lethally subdued another. Could we be looking at a 430,000-year-old gang-like ambush? Absolute certainty is impossible. Alternative models like ritualized killing or complex mortuary behavior cannot be entirely excluded. But taken together, the combination of lethal force, repeated blows from a blunt weapon, and multiple affected individuals is exactly what we'd find from organized raiding or group conflict. If Cima de los Huesos and Grandolina stood alone, you might be tempted to call the Atapuerca caves cursed. Within their dark chambers lie broken skulls, butchered bones, and echoes of ancient bloodshed. But unfortunately, tribal violence is not confined to these caves, nor is the antiquity of these species an excuse. When we look inward at our own species, we hardly see these tendencies begin to vanish. Is tribalism innate to the psyche of Homo sapiens? Or is it a feature of modern society? To investigate this further, we can look at hunter-gatherers. When war occurs among modern hunter-gatherers, it follows the chimp template more often than not. Surprise raids and ambushes dominate. Groups avoid direct battles unless they hold huge numerical superiority. Then, they pounce to sow fear and seize resources. Successful human raiders sometimes drive rivals from ancestral grounds, just as chimpanzees do. The only difference is that humans bring culture into the mix. Alliances can slip across tribal boundaries. Intermarriage can weave peace treaties. Gift exchanges can subside tensions. Some nomadic groups even pause hostilities for feasts, tradings, or seasonal gatherings. These reveal a capacity for negotiated peace that chimps lack. We certainly deserve to give ourselves some credit here. But looking at the archaeological record, we see tribal warfare between hunter-gatherers thousands of years ago as well. Take Naturuk in West Turkana, for example. Here, the battered remains of at least 27 early Holocene foragers were found beside an ancient lagoon. No burial pits or careful placements, just broken bodies strewn where they fell. 10 articulated skeletons bear lethal arrow wounds embedded in the skulls, blunt force fractures, and smashed limbs. Some of their hands show fractures, indicating desperate self-defense. Obsidian bladelets lie buried in some pelvic and thoracic cavities. Radiocarbon and luminescence dating anchor this violent event between 9,500 to 10,500 years ago. This was before sedentary villages emerged in the area. They were mobile hunter-fishers, tied to a shrinking lakeshore. Two interpretations frame this discovery. One sees it as a spontaneous resource raid, an opportunistic strike against an unexpected camp. The other views it as a routine antagonistic encounter, standard raiding behavior among foragers. Either way, Naturuk shatters the myth of prehistoric peace. And there's an even older site in Sudan called Jebel Sahaba. It's located in the arid valleys of the Nile and appears to be a proper cemetery. It consists of over 60 individuals, dated to between 14,000 and 18,000 years ago. We know they were buried intentionally because they were all placed in the fetal position, facing south. This is a key point. Their shared position and orientation are sure signs of a collective identity. Standard burials like this imply rituals, belief systems, and possibly even religions that bound people into lasting groups. Those same bonds that build tight-knit communities also make coordinated aggression possible. They can incentivize groups to defend resources, settle scores, and get revenge. Something like this certainly happened here. Most of the individuals bear scars of conflict. More than 60% of the skeletons show evidence of trauma. Healed wounds tell stories of survival, but unhealed injuries like fractured skulls hint at a sudden death. These weren't isolated skirmishes either. The injuries at Jebel Sahaba are not only consistent with combat, but also suggest a pattern of recurring violence, potentially indicative of prolonged hostilities. A quarter of the skeletons exhibit both healed and unhealed trauma. This means that there are multiple bouts of violence separated by notable amounts of time. The wounds also span across age and sex. No one was spared. The pattern looks less like a random single crime and more like a sustained battle. These warring foragers are a constant reminder that group-based aggression has deep roots in the prehistory of our species. If we transition to North America and examine the Great Plains, we can see how these tendencies persisted through the earliest stages of settled society. Perched on the plateau above the Missouri River, the Crow Creek site in South Dakota looks like the perfect spot for a village. It's elevated, defensible, and close to water. So it was no surprise when archaeologists discovered a large occupation here. Built between 900 and 1300 AD, it consisted of nearly 50 homes. The Native Americans living here practiced a combination of hunting and agriculture. They were foragers just starting to adopt a more sedentary lifestyle. Archaeologists excavating the site noted that the village was clearly built for defense. It was surrounded by deep ditches, bastions, and wooden palisades. And at the western end of one ditch, they found something horrifying. Evidence of a breach in that defense. It was a mass grave, filled with the remains of at least 486 people, including men, women, and children. Many showed signs of extreme violence, such as scalping, decapitation, and dismemberment, and some bodies were fully disarticulated. This was no ordinary burial. This was the Crow Creek Massacre. Radiocarbon dating places the event at around 1400 AD. The dating of the site is crucial because this places it between the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age. At this time, the climate was unstable and food was unpredictable. It's believed that this instability triggered violence among many Native American groups. Out of that violence, the Crow Creek Massacre may be the most extreme. The victims were from the very village they built, and they were likely ancestral to the contemporary Arikara people. Who attacked them? No one knows. Most researchers suspect it was a rival tribe that launched a surprise attack. Whoever they were, they vanished without a trace. They left only bones, bloodstains, and an ancient mystery that still haunts the American plains. While these weren't modern westernized people, they weren't strict hunter-gatherers either. They were settled groups who incorporated horticulture into their society. But this is just one example. Across eastern North America, wooden palisades were the visible line between inside and out. Iroquoian peoples around the Great Lakes ringed their villages with stout wooden walls. Inside, families lived together in longhouses, sometimes hundreds under one roof. Outside, unfamiliar groups were lurking. In Ontario and New York, archaeologists have found palisade trenches and post holes at numerous 15th to 16th century sites. Farther west, urban Mississippian centers did the same, but on a grander scale. Cahokia, the massive mound site in Illinois, surrounded its central precinct with a 3-kilometer wooden stockade. It was punctuated by watchtowers and bastions at regular intervals. The Mississippian world was highly militarized and full of complex politics. Various chiefdoms warred over territory, which led to complex alliances and conquest. I find it interesting that these people were separated from Eurasia over 10,000 years, yet the power structures and tribalism that formed was nearly identical to the Old World. As we all know, war never changes. So far, we've seen examples of tribalism in our modern lives, the lives of past humans, and in our chimp cousins. All of these point to something deeply innate and arguably fundamental to the human experience. Clearly, it's not just the product of agriculture, colonialism, or industrialization. Now we have to ask why. Why are we so prone to creating groups and putting a target on outsiders? The answer likely lies in evolution. Evolutionarily, tribalism can be advantageous. We already touched on how it can help groups of chimps secure new territory and mates, and how it likely helped Homo erectus take down big prey. But we can go even deeper. There is a deep genetic tendency toward tribalism, and something called kin selection appears to be the source of it. Kin selection is the tendency of organisms to help relatives who share your genes to survive, because in doing so, you increase the chances of those genes surviving and reproducing into the future. For example, if you risk your life to save your brother, 50% of your genes would still survive, since that's what you two share. This interpersonal aid helps bind families together. However, that genetic incentive to help someone gets smaller the less related you are. If that's the case, how can we explain the coordination needed to form communities composed of total strangers? After all, if you aren't genetically related, then why should you let them in your tribe? This is where reciprocal altruism comes in. Reciprocal altruism is a way of saying, help now, get help later. Individuals who assist non-relatives can expect the favor to be returned later, turning short-term costs into long-term gains. Evolutionarily, it lets cooperation spread beyond immediate kin. People who trade favors can have significant survival advantages in hunting, childcare, and information sharing. As small exchanges scale, social norms and rituals develop to keep track of obligations and reward loyal partners. These norms bind strangers into lasting social contracts. We can also take a look at group selection to help explain tribalism. This is the idea that natural selection can act on individuals and groups of individuals. For example, groups with more cooperative, pro-social members can outcompete selfish groups. Their cohesiveness helps them win resources, territories, and allies. Think of a warrior who puts their life at risk for the greater good, or the individual who volunteers themselves as a sacrifice to appease the gods and bring peace to their tribe. As individuals, these behaviors lead to genetic dead ends. However, they reinforce the identity and survival of the group. Not only are genes looking to propagate into the future, but so are cultures. Viewed in this way, tribes themselves are evolutionary units that compete against each other. The genes of the individual and the culture of the group are intertwined. Their survival depends on each other, so they consequently share competitors. This is where things can go haywire. Extreme tribalism often springs from survival pressures, and few pressures have been more persistent throughout biology than contagious disease. In colonial America, epidemics introduced by Europeans tore through indigenous communities. They collapsed populations, disrupted social networks, and left power vacuums that intensified competition over land. Inevitably, Native Americans grew skeptical of interacting with Europeans. Faced with invisible killers, survivors tightened their circles. They developed stricter boundaries and harsher exclusion of outsiders. Those responses weren't just fear. They were adaptive strategies that reduced infection risk and protected group survival. It's an example of how the intermixing of groups was a catastrophic event that almost wiped out an entire population of people. In such a scenario, abiding by your tribe and staying away from disease-ridden foreigners would be advantageous. That said, we're walking a thin line here. The same adaptive tribalism can quickly lead to human-driven horrors. The very measures that keep groups alive could also harden into lasting hostility toward neighbors. What starts as stranger danger can be reframed politically and morally into a project of elimination. Fear hardens into stories that dehumanize the other. My tribe is the hero, your tribe is the enemy. When small group loyalty is amplified by ideology, bureaucratic power, and modern technology, tribalism stops being defensive and becomes industrial. Consider Nazi Germany. It was a disgusting fusion of myth, pseudoscience, state machinery, and extreme tribalism. Propaganda simplified complex problems into an us and them story. The Jewish community was likened to parasites, eliciting that instinctual aversion to disease. Many were essentially brainwashed into believing the supremacy of their tribe. But it is not confined to the Holocaust. The Armenian, Cambodian, Rwandan, and Palestinian genocides all share a similar pattern. They devise a form of scapegoating to blame outsiders or minorities for large, complicated issues that threaten their group. The result is unjustifiable, wide-scale suffering. What began as an adaptation to small-scale tribal living can be hijacked by leaders who turn fear into policy and identity into a weapon. The lesson is stark. The same instincts that knit groups together can unravel humanity on the world stage. So does this mean we're doomed? How can we keep the good stuff like large-scale cooperation and solidarity without unleashing these horrors into the future? I'd like to hear from you guys in the comments section down below. What do you think we could do to quell tribalism? Tribalism is written deep into our history, from the chimp patrols on forest edges to the battles of our distant ancestors. Left unchecked, it can harden into division and destruction. But those same instincts that once fueled raids and rivalries are also what lets us form families, communities, and nations. We have transformed warfare into ritualized, non-lethal matches in which we cheer for our team. Even violent fights have become a source of bonding for different cultures and nations. So no, we cannot simply turn off our tribal instincts. But maybe we don't have to. Instead of trying to erase tribalism, we can choose which tribe we want to feed. If we can expand our circle of belonging to see more people as part of us rather than them, then the oldest instinct in our species might also be the one that carries us forward. If you made it this far, you're officially part of the tribe. So subscribe, comment what you want to see next, and smash that like button. And if you want to see more, YouTube thinks you'll watch this video,